Yo, 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 yo! What's up, what's up? What's up, what's up? Live na ba ako? Live na ba ako? Anyway, ito, welcome back. Kung Jenny, andyan ka ulit. Salamat ulit sa KitKat at corned beef. At this. Ito, i-debunk natin yung sinasabi niyang research. Apaka-intellectually dishonest itong taon to, grabe. I mean nakakainis. Nakakainis yung mga ganitong klaseng tao. Kabago-bago mo pa lang, propagandista ka na rin. Nakakasuka. Ito, didebunk kita ha. Sagutin mo ha. Siyempre, alam ko naman hindi ka sasagot. Pero gusto ko na sabihin sagutin mo ha. Game. Napabang debate, wala yan. Game, let's go.
Galit na galit ang mga manggagawa kasi pinaglaruan at the last minute. Ito,
Sinungaling. Hindi nagkaroon ng bycam tapos pinaglaruan. Sino naglaro? Congress. Nauna yung Senate Yung propagandista pinaglaruan daw.
ang 200 pesos legislated wage increase. In fact, the National Wage Coalition said, okay na kami sa 100.
Hindi yan sinabi ni Jinggoy. Kung okay na pala sa 100, tamo dinibang mo sarili mo dito, little tulfo. Bakit? Okay na pala sila sa 100, bakit hindi na-adapt ng House? Cricket. O, diba? Propaganda, sinungaling. May nagsisinungaling. Okay na pala sa 100. Bakit hindi na-adapt ng House? So, sino naglaro? Diba ang House? Lower House, no? Palagay mo, makes sense? Eli? Sabi mo, ikaw nagsabi. Okay na sa 100 ba't hindi na-adapt? Sino naglaro? Congress. Debunk.
Dan none at all. Binanggit niya ng National Wage Coalition, sige kung hindi kayo magkasundo, Senate at House, willing ang mga manggagawa na tanggapin na yung 100 pesos.
Di kailangan lang gawin ng House is i-adapt yun sa Senate. Tama ba? O ba't hindi ginawa ng House? Tapos sinisisi mo Senate tsaka si PBBM. Yung House pala nagmatigas. Ano gagawin natin? Kasi feeling ko walang problema kay Presidente na pirmahan yung 100. Pero 200? Dude, come on. Why not 5,000? Hindi na pala magkakos sa inflation, diba?
At malinaw yung mga
Okay na pala pero pinatulog ng 1 year, diba?
mga may salarin dito. Unang-una na dyan, definitely, si Senate President Cheese.
Kita mo Senate President Jesus Escudero daw. Lahat sinisi niya na. Pura lang House. Ikaw na rin nagsabi, okay na nga raw sa 100. Pag hindi nagkasundo, di ba? O ba't hindi na-adapt ng House? So dapat, asisihin yung House. Kayo. Kasabaki, wala ka pa naman dyan. Umiepal ka lang. So, bakit ang blame mo is Senate lang tsaka Presidente? Damay mo niya House. Escudero na naman. Laki ng guard kay Cheese. Pura lang tropa mo, no? Pura lang tropa niya. Antindi, di ba? Antindi.
Escudero, na po pwede naman sana na pinabilis.
Pinabilis. Akala ko ba okay na yung 100? At ikaw na, ang gulo mo rin mag-explain Okay na ba yung 100 o pinabilis dapat? Dapat in-adapt na lang nila, di ba? Pwede naman nilang i-adapt yung sa Senate. Actually, hindi na kailangan ng bycam nun, di ba? Ano papabilisin? Nakikita mo, contradictory yung mga claims niya. Ano pa mabilisin kung i-adapt lang ng Congress yung 100? Sabi mo kanina, okay na Di ba? Contradictory.
Yung pag-convene doon sa BICAM.
Hindi nga kailangan ng bycam, technically. Kung payag naman kamo, i-adapt lang sa Senate. 100 ka mo, okay na, di ba? O, bakit pa may bycam? Bakit may bycam? Wala lang discussion yon, di ba? Nakikita mo contradictory yung mga claims niya. Okay na daw 100. Tapos di mo sinisisi yung House. Pero sa'yo mo okay na 100. Kayo na ba yung 100? Di ba sa Senate? O di dapat na mag-adapt yung House? Kung hinadapt ng House yon, di wala nang bycam. Tama. Oh.
Actually, nandun na nga yung mga members of the House sa Senate. Pero hindi pinabilis eh. Inuna yung kung ano-anong drama doon sa Senado.
In 2 days.
Okay, sa pag-usapan itong legislated wage increase. At hindi rin natin maisasantabi itong role ng Malacanang ng Palasyo
Oh, tama na?
ni PBBM because PBBM could have certified this bill as urgent.
Yeah. He could. Did you see the term that you used? Could. So, anong issue mo kung hindi? Binubuhat ang House kasi tropa nga naman. Could, di ba? Oh, anong issue? Ba't pati presidente, dinadamay mo na dito? Lahat na lang presidente. Bakit nagmukha ng Little Tambi yan? Sa Congress nga pala, no?
But he chose not to. Actually, pa-safe eh. Yung binabanggit ni...
Tamo, for some reason, he chose not to. For some reason, ang paningin niya is default yung certifies as urgent. Hindi mo pwede sabihin he chose not to. Kasi by default, it is not. Ang pwede mo lang sabihin, he chose to. Kasi hindi naman by default urgent yan eh. Kaya nga isa-certify, di ba? Kung isa-certify as urgent yan, hindi mo pwede sabihin, he chose not to. You are leading. You are assuming that it is urgent already. Ang tawag doon is begging the question. Circular reasoning. Kasi you have to prove first that it is urgent. Tapos ang tanong mo lang sa mga kamanggagawa mo, anong tanong mo? Naniniwala ba kayo doon na hindi naman priority to? I think you have to prove that muna. You cannot claim na it is urgent. You have to prove it first that it is urgent. Kasi kung it is urgent, why does he have to certify it as urgent? Come on. Are you that stupid? Or you're just a politician? He didn't choose not to. He just didn't choose to. Not only that, hindi yung issue. By default, tama lahat ng dumadaan sa kalsada, pwede kong parahin lahat. And I chose not to. Teka, by default, di ko naman dapat sila pinapara eh. So I chose to na parahin sila. Hindi mo pwedeng gamitin yung chose not to kasi you are already assuming that it is urgent. Gamit utak, logic. Ang pwede mo lang i-claim is he chose to certify it as urgent. Hindi positive act na hindi gawing urgent yon. By default, lahat sila ay plain na papel. Okay? Ang pwede mo lang sabihin, he chose to certify this as urgent. Nagigets nyo ba, guys? Lahat yan ay blanco. Ang pwede mo lang i-claim, he chose to certify something as urgent. Hindi mo pwedeng i-claim na he chose not to certify it As. That's not a positive act. It's just an absence of action. My goodness. Ito yung mga binoboto nyo. Pinaparami nyo si TULFO. Archetype, TULFO. O, Ectype. Parang ganito, Eli. Hindi ka pinili na hindi bigyan ng utak. Hindi ka lang talaga binabigyan. Hindi, by default naman may utak naman ng mga tao. And you chose not to use it. Di ba? Nakita mo, chose not to use it. By definition kasi, you cannot say that, technically. Kasi, ginagamit mo na nga siya. Ginagamit mo siya actually, when you actually speak, when you actually think about things, you are using your brain. Okay? You cannot escape it. Pero hindi pwedeng he chose not to use it because he is using it. Not effectively and efficiently, but he is using it. Pero kasi pag sinabi natin use your brain, it means your intelligence. Yes nyo?
Claire Castro, Attorney Claire Castro na may prosesong Attorney Claire Castro na safe yung binabanggit ni Claire Castro, Attorney Claire Castro na may prosesong pinagdaanan, pagtatago na lang sa teknikalidad yun eh.
Ano pagkatago sa technical? I cannot believe this. I'm defending you si Claire Castro against this TULFO. Can we just skip that shit?
Kung gusto, may paraan. Pwedeng pabilisin. They could have certified it as urgent, pero hindi ginawa. Hindi ginawa ng palasyo. So, nakakalungkot.
Just silence. I cannot believe this. Actually, common po kasi yan na statement na marinig ko sa iba. Pero somehow mali pa yan if susundin mo. Next question. Padala na ulit ng t-shirt yan. Ayaw niya din sa due process.
Nakakagalit at dapat singilin yung mga dapat singilin dito.
Maganda ipaliwanag nyo bakit very important ho na talagang natuloy ho sana ito pong pagtataas ng sahod ng ating mga manggagawa.
Oo. Lagi kong binabanggit na kahit itaas ng 100 to 200 pesos ang sahod ng mga manggagawa, hindi pa talaga siya increase eh.
Kaya nga. Why? Ba't ka pa nag-hold back? Make it 5K. 5K in total. Mga 4,000 plus increase. Why not 4,000 plus increase? Unang-una, hindi mo masasagot yan kasi magmumukha kang tanga. Diba? Kasi alam mo, it will affect the inflation, right? Inflation rate, di ba? Alam mo 'yon, CPI. Oh. It will affect. At that level, it will affect. Makikita mo talaga, oh my goodness. What the heck? 5K na para ma-solve na problema. Kaya nga, di ba? Ba't nagtitipid ka pa? Hindi pantao yan, pare. Hindi pantao yan 200 na yan. Hindi, 5,000. 5,000. Yan pantao na yan. Hindi na yan pan-robot. Gaganahan ng mga manggagawa niyan. 5K? O ba't di mo gawin 5K? Sabi mo naman, di ba, disconnect naman? O, madidibang ka dito. Napaka-propagandista mo rin eh. Tsaka intellectual dishonest ka.
Recovery pa lang siya. Recovery ng alin, ng nawala na value doon sa sahod ng mga manggagawa because of inflation. So kaya
5K increase, baka bukas wala ka na trabaho. Tsaka, hindi lang yun eh. Bakit hindi mo ilatag dyan? Ano ba yung inflation na sinasabi mo? Sa food ba? O hindi?
kahit dagdagan natin 100 pesos yan, 200 pesos, bumalik lang yung halaga ng sahod na nawala sa mga manggagawa. 1989 pa ang huling legislated wage increase. From 1989 to 2025, ilang daang beses o ilang libong beses.
Mechanism lang yun sa 1989 eh. Mechanism lang yun eh. Rationalization nga eh. 5K increase, 3K na isang pack ng Yossi.
na ba nagtaas ang presyo ng mga bilihin? Eh, ang presyo ng mga bilihin hindi naman taon-taon tumataas eh. Every other day, every week, tumataas ang presyo ng mga pangunahing bilihin.
Oh, wala ka pang data dyan. Hindi naman totoo yan. Ito kasi ang problema eh. Bakit ka nagre-resort sa ambiguity? Ba't ka nagre-resort sa ambiguity? Ilatag mo kung ano ba yung sinasabi mo na bilihin. Kasi mamaya may ilalatag ako sa'yo, sasampal ko sa mukha mo. Metaphorically. Okay? Pagkukumparahin natin yung pinagmamalaki mong research na kahit naman yung research na yun dinibang ka na at papakitaan kita nang may citation pa. Oh.
Bilhin at serbisyo. So definitely justified yung pagpapanawagan na itaas ang sahod ng mga manggagawa. Debunk naman na yung mga
Debunk na daw ha.
pananakot ng mga malalaking mga grupo ng mga negosyante that this will cause inflation, this will cause
This will cause inflation daw ha. Tama ha? Debunk na daw yon. So, sinasabi niya disconnect yan. Hindi magkakos ng inflation.
massive unemployment. In fact, kung Terry, Alex, may lumabas, kakalabas lang na study ng UP SOLAIR.
May lumabas daw na study. UP SOLAIR. Pupuntahan natin yung study.
Na pinapakita that there is an insignificant impact sa inflation pag tinaas ang sahod ng mga manggagawa. Meron din na kapag moderate wage increase, hindi rin nagkakaroon ng negative impact pagdating naman sa employment. So, hindi totoo yung binabanggit na magkukos ito ng matinding economic impact kapag tinaas ang sahod ng mga manggagawa. With regards to the micro, small, medium...
Punta na tayo sa research. Malinaw ha? Eto yon. SOLAIR UP. Ready na ba tayo? Ready na ba kayo? Ready na, guys? Basahin natin ha. Basahin natin. Sige raw, Sir Kayu, tingnan ko rin po ang source niya. Ito yun. Ito yung source sinasabi niya. Ito yung sinasabi niya. Ito. Measuring the impact of wage hikes on employment and inflation. Samahan mo kami. Is significant. 2 new quantitative studies. Punta tayo dito sa conclusion. Para mabasa nyo rin. Okay? Our 2 quantitative studies reveal that moderate wage hike will not trigger a catastrophe of retrenchment and inflation as raised by some quarters. Yun yung sinasabi niya, right? Okay. The possible employment and price impact of the pending bill for 200 peso wage hike in the House of Representatives and 100 in the Senate cannot be directly answered by your study. Ulitin natin ha. The pending bills for a 200 wage hike in the House of Representatives and 100 pesos in the Senate cannot be directly answered by our study. Outs pala sila. Ano masasabi mo, Eli? Misleading ka. Intellectually dishonest ka. Basahin natin tuloy. Still, we do have a natural experiment in 1989. Unang-una, may krisis niyan. Isipin nyo lang, sino paniniwalaan mo? Yung may data o yung ito lang? Yan. Puro estimates, wala man lang citation, 'di ba? Wala man lang citation, walang footnotes, 'di ba? Wala no. Okay. Still, we do have a natural experiment in 1989 when the last legislated wage hike was enacted. The 25 across-the-board salary increase then did not trigger an economic crisis. This is consistent with the findings of our study. The 1989 legislated salary hike amounted to 40% shock. In comparison, 200 amounts to a 31 wage hike for Metro Manila. Okay. 1989 ay actually may krisis. Punta tayo ha. Nakita nyo ba yan? 84. Boom! Ay. Ngek. Max. Nakita nyo ba yan? 87. Naalala nyo yan? Tapos, dito pumasok. 89. Wala raw inflation, no? Punta natin mismo dun sa ano? Sa dates. Sabihin natin 1984 to 1995. Sabihin natin ganyan. Okay. Tingnan nyo yan. Ito ay galing tayo sa krisis. In that context, actually, good ang wage hike. Guess nyo? Kasi we're looking for inflation eh. Kasi negative yung inflation natin, no? Recession. Ayan, no? Galing tayo sa 62.8% na inflation. Ay. Tuloy. 1989 ginamit niya, hindi niya pwedeng gamitin yan. Ang daming factors na involved dyan. Punta ngayon tayo. Eto. Dito muna tayo sa lay. Punta na tayo sa bandang ang argument ay huwag na tayo doon sa will na sabi ko na yung wage push inflation na ano ko na yan eh. Doon tayo sa doesn't increase. Okay? Okay? Doon tayo sa doesn't increase the position. This is the argument. Okay? While arguments for wage push inflation exist, the empirical evidence to back these arguments is not always strong. Historically, minimum wage increases have had only a very weak association with inflationary pressure on prices in an economy. Okay. That's the argument against okay. For example, in 2016, researchers from the W.E. Upjohn Institute for Employment Research examined the effect of prices on minimum wage increases in various states in the U.S. from 1978 through 2015. Okay? They found that wage price elasticities are notably lower than reported in previous work. So, ito ay position ni Eli ha. Eli to, sa side ni Eli to. Hindi mo natin basahin yung 4. Ano na yun eh, mas maganda na yung doon sa argument na nila, di ba? We find prices grow by 0.36% for every 10% increase in the minimum wage. Ay, teka. Wait. Ulitin natin yung basa. We find prices grow by 0.36% for every 10% for against sa side niya to. So dito pa lang debunk ka na. Hindi to. So connect, exactly. Ito yung argument na sa side nyo to ha. Unang-unang debunk sa'yo, connected. 0.36% per 10% increase. Ilang percent ba yung 200 pesos? 30%. Right? Tama ba? This is just 10% increase. How about 30? Moreover, increases in prices following minimum wage hikes generally have occurred in the month the minimum wage hike is implemented and not in the months before or months after. Okay na yan. May reason na yun dyan eh. Punta muna tayo dito. Paborito ni Yusek Claire Castro na resources. Mainstream. Mainstream media. Okay. Pagbigyan natin lahat, pati si Yusek. Okay? Legislated wage hikes to harm economy. Hurt poor Filipinos economic team. Ito yung sinasabi mong economist kuno. Ikaw yung kuno. Puntahan natin ha. The economic team of President Marcos warned about the pending wage hike bills, arguing that the proposed legislation could fan inflation and hurt the poor as well as small businesses. Bakit? Mamaya. Policymakers said they wrote to President Marcos to warn him of the dangerous repercussions of the measures seeking across-the-board minimum wage hikes. Oh, cool. Some senators, wage hike recently approved, blah, blah, blah. Officials said businesses might have to increase their prices to absorb the additional staffing costs. Why? Because small businesses are operating on thin margin. Either they mag-layoff sila, absorb nila, parang break even na sila, and then, ano yung sunod? Ipasa sa consumer. Mamaya. Which can stoke consumer prices. They added that micro, small, medium enterprises might be forced to stop hiring people because of the wage hike, a development that can worsen joblessness. Yes. The economic team estimated that a 200 peso increase in wages could raise inflation by around 2 percentage points. 10% kanina, di ba? 10%, 0.36%. Times 3, 1 or 2 percentage points. Siguro maximum na yun. While a 100 peso hike may add 0.7 percentage points. This, they said, could erase some of the government's progress and bringing price growth within 2 to 4% target range of the Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas. Pala naman eh. Next. Meanwhile, policymakers said the proposal could blow the unemployment rate by 0.2 percentage points, 100 pay hike by 0.6 percentage points for the 200 increase. That's mainstream, guys. Sorry, that's mainstream. Punta na ngayon tayo sa BSP. Okay? Ano pagkakatiwalaan mo? Etong walang kagana-gana na wala man lang study na maayos. O, tignan nyo. O, eto. Ha? Bangko Sentral ng Pilipinas with citations na you can actually research sa journal. Peer review, ha? Peer review. Ewan ko sa inyo. Minimum wage is the lowest pay, blah, blah, blah. Blah, blah, blah. The literature on minimum wage in the Philippines is limited and is mostly on the employment effects. Ito yun, ano. Whilst generally agreed that the goals of minimum wage are socially desirable, of course, there are differing views on conclusion of its impact on employment and prices on its effectiveness as a tool for poverty alleviation. Standard economic theory predicts that increases in minimum wage can lead to lower employment and higher prices. Standard economic theory daw, ha? Oh, economics major. Standard economic theory. Disconnect, no? Ang resourceful mo kayo, sir, kayo. Kasi yan po talaga ang dapat. Such effects of the minimum wage have important consequences for the welfare of households. Punta na tayo dyan. Punta na tayo sa ano. Punta tayo sa 14. Alika. Punta tayo sa 14. Tara. Ito. Ayan na. Tingnan niya. Ayan na. Puntahan nyo na lang kung gusto niya. I don't have all day. What tayo sa 14? Were found to determine the current value of observation, keeping findings. Ito. Past changes in CPI, food CPI, and non-food CPI, pinaghiwalay nila kasi para malaman nila, di ba? Were found to help determine the current value of minimum wage. This observation is keeping with the findings of Reyes, 1998, Bersales, 2011. In their study, Reyes, 1998, and Bersales, 2011, reviewed the implementation of the minimum wage fixing process. They examined the factors listed, blah, 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 blah. Based on the results, a key determinant of minimum wage across regions is CPI. Cool. However, Reyes, 1998, observes that wage adjustments were generally based on changes in CPI, mainly because it is the variable available on a monthly basis. Nonetheless, increases in consumer prices, particularly of basic food commodities like rice and oil, often lead to petitions for higher minimum wage. Oh, ganun pala yun. Okay. Ito, policy implications. Central banks monitor wage adjustments to ascertain that they do not constitute second-round effects. The push for wage increases following an increase in the price of individual goods or services could result in a wage price spiral. Teka. Ilay. Hindi ba ito yung tinatanong ko sa'yo? Wage price spiral. Cost push inflation and demand pull inflation. Wage price spiral. Yan yun eh. Buti pa yung Bangko Sentral, alam, no? Ikaw hindi, no? Economics major ka niyan. Oh. That could cause inflation to accelerate and inflation expectations to be disanchored. Okay? Thus, monetary authorities, ito yung mga ginagamit ng Bangko Sentral yan. Okay. Results from the empirical exercise indicate that minimum wage increases on average cause increase in the regional CPI. Ulitin natin ha. Results from the empirical exercises indicate that minimum wage increases on average cause increases in the regional CPI. However, the estimated increase in regional CPI is observed. Yung CPI yung value ng ano yan, ng value ng bilihin ha. Okay? Is observed to be relatively small and may not lead to inflationary pressures. Additionally, minimum wage adjustments are undertaken only once a year. Assuming. Okay? Unless there are supervening circumstances and thus may not result in wage push inflation. Okay? Wage 2009. Ito. Wage growth in the Philippines has been observed to be sluggish. Data from the labor force survey. There it is. You can research that. And family income expenditure. Hassan and Jandok found that wage data from surveys indicate weak growth in wages and earnings for workers across different blah blah blah. Similar observation emerges when looking at the labor share of income. Kasi meron siyang, meron siyang, 21 conclusion. Teka. Puntahan natin yung Vietnam. May makikita kayo ditong kagilagilalas. Tingin, Eli! Tingin. Walang kadaya-daya. Bago tayo sa conclusion, eto muna. Table 3. Ha? Based on the 2027 Labor Force Survey, 18% of service sector workers, 37% of industry. Kasi ang ginawa nila kasi dito, tinignan nila sa agriculture side, tapos tinignan nila yung sa service sector. Kasi lumalabas ito na parang nasa 50+% ang nasa service, and then parang maliit na ito nga tayo eh. Industry sector workers and 42% of agriculture sector workers receive daily wages, blah 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 blah. Above minimum wage significantly higher compared to agricultural. Yep. For the industry service sectors, the share of workers with daily earnings above the minimum wage is 38%. Respective agriculture sector is 21%. Ayan nga. Tama. Sorry, hindi pala 50+. Para 47. Nonetheless, calls for increasing blah 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 blah. Ito. Nonetheless, calls for increasing the minimum wage are often met with resistance by firms, particularly the smaller ones, that argue that labor in the Philippines is already very costly compared with other countries. Totoo ba? Tingnan natin. Minimum wages in the Philippines are relatively higher than those of Cambodia and Vietnam, with the minimum wage in NCR being higher than the minimum wage in Malaysia. Totoo? High labor costs can result in lower competitiveness for the Philippines against other economies. Debunk na yan, no, Eli? Debunk na! Ito yung sinasabi niya, debunk na daw to. Yung mga walang kwenta, debunk na yan eh. O, puntahan natin, ha? Comparative wages in selected countries in US dollars. Ang Pilipinas, daily, 9.57, nasa 266 to 287. Okay? Yan pinakmataas sa atin eh, di ba? Punta tayo sa Thailand. Ito, mataas to. 279.44, 299.40. Punta tayo Malaysia. $227 to $247.55. Mas mataas tayo, ano? No? Ano? No? Ano? Mas mataas tayo, ano? In dollars. So, hindi problema dito ang minimum wage. Ang problema dito, corruption. Well, may corruption din naman sa kanila pero kaya hindi tayo efficient. Tingnan mo na lang. NCR, 266.47, 287.23. Per month yan, ha? In dollars. Tingnan mo Malaysia. 227.75 to 247.55. Punta tayo Vietnam. $145 to $163.87. Vietnam. Cambodia, $170 per month, ha? Indonesia, 93.41 to 234.32 dollars. Myanmar, 97.77. Ano sabi mo, Eli? Nagre-recover pa lang? Ay, totoo? O, ba't di mo i-debunk to? Sabi mo na, debunk na naman yan mga yan, di ba? Eh, di debunk mo to. Kawawa pa tayo. Kawawa tayo. Sobrang kawawa natin. Tandaan nyo, yung mga sunod-sunod na wage increase na yan, wage hike, tandaan nyo, dyan na wala ang trabaho sa US. Kaya nga si Trump ngayon, gustong ibalik. Well, hindi naman tayo developing, so hindi naman tayo consumer, hindi naman tayo mag-transition from sa consumption base. Kasi hindi naman natin kaya, so we cannot sustain our own economy, aasa pa rin tayo sa kanila. Bakit nga ulit na sa atin ng outsourcing company sila? Hindi ko nga alam eh. Hindi ko alam eh. Ba't di mo to i-debunk? Ang ingay-ingay mo dyan. Kabago-bago mo, apakayabang mo na. Wala ka namang datang maibigay. Eto, data mo. Data ba tawag niya sa lecheng yan? Tignan mo nga yan. O eto, papakita ko sa iyo. O, punta na tayo sa may conclusion. Conclusion. O, may references ha. Ayan o. You can research the references. Eli? Pakidebunk lahat, please. O, may kinuha pa nga ako dito eh, oh. Saan ba yun? Ito ba yun? No. Okay. Ito. 442 page. Just for you, Eli. What does the minimum wage do? Oh, yung Wolfson na yan. Alam ko na andito yan eh. Alam ko na dito yan. O basta nandyan yan. Diyan ko nakuha yan eh. Oh, yan oh. Ayun ang mga citation tungkol dyan. Pero, punta tayo sa conclusion. Conclusion. Binoto ko yan si ELI dahil gusto niyang mawala provincial rate. Di ko alam ba't yan na pinaglalaban after. Minimum wage is the lowest pay that the employers can offer their workers for the work that they perform or for the service they render. Equivalently, it is the lowest wage at which workers are allowed to sell their labor. Standard economic theory predicts the increases in minimum wage can lead to lower. Diba, parang ano natin to kanina. Nabasa natin to, di ba kanina? These effects of the minimum wage, consequently welfare of households, mainly low-income households, which minimum wage is trying to protect. Actually, may argument dito, hindi ko na inaalala ko lang sa banda eh. Yung tungkol sa poor. Sila yung apektado, yung bottom 30%, because they will shoulder that inflation. They are the most victim here. Wala na, hindi niya lalaban yung abolish provincial rate. The literature on minimum wage in the Philippines is limited and is mostly on its employment effects. This study look at the potential impact of changes in minimum wages on prices. On one hand, results from the empirical exercise indicate the minimum wage have an impact regional, blah, 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 additional. Given that the estimate increase regional is observed to be relatively small, this may not lead to inflationary pressures. Moreover, minimum wage adjustments are undertaken only once a year unless ito rin yung sinabi kanina pala. Inulit lang. Nahanap ko yung ano eh. Ito, ayun ang mga studies oh. Sinabi na dyan pati yung difference nung sa regional. Ano ba ito yun? Ito ko nabasa yun eh. Asan na yung pera Yes, kaya nga dapat 4K increase. Di ba dapat, ano na nga? Buo tayo dito. Standard prices given there is an increase minimum wage, firms will squeeze their ito. In standard competitive markets, prices are assumed to be given. Thus, if there's an increase in the minimum wage, firms will either squeeze their profits or reduce employment to cope with the higher cost of production. That's what I said, right? Intense competition in the market, however, drives firms' profit margins to the narrowest possible. Firms, particularly the small, low-wage ones, will have difficulty absorbing the higher production cost through lower profits. Hence, to minimize costs, firms often reduce employment with an increase in the minimum wage. O yan ha, yan una, number 2 yan ha, number 2. O, sunod. The pricing assumption of the standard competitive model is reasonable if firms covered by the minimum wage increase compete with firms that are not subject to the minimum wage. Ayan, may citation ulit. If all firms, however, experience the increase in minimum wage, economic theory suggests that at least part of the increase in cost will be passed on to the consumer as higher prices. Isang malaking consideration sa totoo lang sa pataas ng minimum wage ay yung sector ng subsistence poor. Ito yung mga walang trabaho, kung meron man and off. Hindi lang yon. Sila din naman yung talaga yung mag-shoulder ng inflationary pressure niyan eh. Kasi sila yung walang trabaho. Sila yung poor. Sila yung magugutom, right? Kung magkakaroon man ng increase, sila yung apektado. Kasi sabihin ito manggagawa. Gagamitin pa sabihin na yung mga mahihirap. Teka lang, i-research mo muna. Yung sinasabi mong survey na yan. Puntahan natin mismo yung mga mahihirap. Pustahan tayo, walang trabaho. O so, paano sana yung minimum wage hike mo? Parang tanga lang, di ba? Ito. The share of the increase in price that consumers will bear will depend on factors such as demand elasticity, the convexity of demand, the elasticity of marginal cost with respect to output and degree of market competition. Increasing the minimum wage will directly affect those who are in between the old and minimum wage, while there are indirect spillover for those who are above and below the new minimum wage. Totoo. Higher minimum wage leads to an increase in production cost, which first, yun din sinabi ko sa inyo, di ba? Higher minimum wage, syempre kasama sa production cost yun. And services. Which firms address either by passing on to consumers in the form of higher prices or by adjusting their level of input and output. Katulad na sinabi ko, naalala nyo ganito. Sino ba tong si O'Reilly? Behavioral economics eh. At saka si Smith, di ba? Si Adam Smith. The moral sentiment is always about self, right? So, tingnan nyo na lang ganito. Sabihin natin meron kang 20. Okay? Meron kang 20 na empleyado. Okay? Ngayon, dahil tumaas ngayon yung minimum wage, no? Ngayon, kung kaya mo, gagawin mong 10 para pumasok ka sa exception, right? Tama ba? Tama ba? Tama. Tapos, magre-resort yan sa informal employment. Or, ganito mangyayari. Tatanggalin mo yung 10. Ipapa-shoulder mo yung trabaho na yon dun sa 10. So, ngayon, imbis na may leeway, yung mga manggagawa, laspag na laspag sila ngayon. Of course, mataas yung binabayad ko sa'yo, hindi ka pwedeng paloko-loko. Hindi pwede yung pwede na. Pipili ako ng magaling at willing to do extra mile. Gets niya? Ganun talaga mangyayari. O di ngayon, naging self-fulfilling prophecy ngayon, yung robot. Bakit? 20, naging 10, maraming trabaho. So, marami dapat silang gawin. Right? Naalala mo show na Warrior ng HBO kayo? Yung written by Bruce Lee, si Dylan Leary doon, Irish worker rep, pinataas sweldo ng Chinese. Kaya yung mga Americans na lang kinuha, yun Rumble. Oo. Cuba may iwan worker and then may layoff, right? Di ba dapat high quality yung output if mataas ang wage na tatanggapin mo? Of course. Lalo pang magpipilit ng mga 10. Gagawa yan ng way para maging 10 lang yung employee niya. Para makapasok sa exemption. Kung sa micro. Right? Eh sa SME, wala ka na magagawa. Sorry, dude. You're part of this shit. Iyak ng mga laborers, dati mga sa wage system, nasa cost of production lang ang labor. Wala silang share sa profit. Hindi rin maka-share na capital for consumption lang talaga ang sweldo niya. Cost efficient pala. Actually, that's one of the argument. Kasi, minsan, ang nangyayari is, because of that practice na mas lalong nagiging efficient, 20, tapos 10 na lang ngayon, di ba? Nagiging efficient, tumataas yung productivity, na-counteract niya yung inflation. Gets? Isa sa mga arguments yun. At makes sense yun. The resulting new employment and wage produce a new equilibrium income, aggregate demand, and consequently output levels. Over time, inflation and unemployment rate consistent with the equilibrium will again affect the wage and prices. Ayun na pala. Ito. Tingnan na, Eli. Ito. Minimum wage adjustments. Firms either squeeze profits, tama yung sinasabi ko na i-absorb mo kasi profit margin mo, di ba? I-absorb mo ba? Ibig sabihin, magiging manipis na yung profit margin mo. Or, lower demand for labor. lay off. And then, ipa-shoulder mo sa mga natitira, maging efficient sila. Wala nang tambay-tambay, wala nang cellphone. Wala nang ganon. Or, increase prices. O, itong dalawang to, lower production mangyayari dito. Totoo naman. Lower production talaga mangyayari dito. Ito increase, diretso sa changes sa aggregate demand supply. Natawa ko dun sa isang podcast nila, yung kasama yung mga kasamahan ni Eli. Sabi, ang pagkakasabi niya, hindi naman daw yata nagwo-work yung supply, parang hindi naman yata daw totoo yung supply and demand. Kasi mas mataas daw yung supply kaysa sa demand. Sabi ko, isn't that what supply and demand means? Parang hindi nagwo-work or hindi totoo. You just invoked it. Mas mataas yung supply kaysa sa demand. So it's not a question of does it work or totoo ba yon? It's just a matter of nasan yung price. Right? Yun yung point, di ba? Parang, what the hell is wrong with this guy? With this person. Gal pala, gal. Shout out MGN. Ayan na, movements in inflation. Ayan na, BSP yan. At may mga, may mga yan, yan, magsawa ka. Ito, US minimum wage, Lemos 2006 undertook yielded an observation that a 10% increase in the US minimum wage raises food prices by no more than 4% and the overall prices level by no more than 0.4%. May spillover, blah blah blah. Basahin nyo na lang, andyan naman Tapos ito ibibigay mo sa amin, tinatanga mo naman kami. Masyado mo naman kami tinatanga. Conclusion pa nga lang yan, debunk ka na. Ulitin natin ha. The pending bills, the possible employment and price impact of the pending bills for a 200 peso wage hike in the House of Representatives and 100 peso in the Senate cannot be directly answered by our study. Napaka-intellectually dishonest mo, Eli. Nagyabang ka pa. Sinabi na sa mong research. Tapos ito ibibigay mo sa amin, tinatanga mo kami. Ito binibigay ko sa'yo, i-debunk mo yan, sa BSP yan.